Yes, everybody, and welcome back to another daily drop brought to you by BetterHelp.com. Really excited to be partnering with BetterHelp. We'll talk about them a little bit more and a little bit later in the podcast, so stay tuned for that. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner. Joining me, as he always does, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, here for a Carolina basketball-related drop. And this is a topic I'm excited to talk about and intrigued to talk about in a lot of ways. Mainly because it's a topic I've discussed a lot off camera, not necessarily with you or people. We have talked about it a little bit, or people, on the THI staff, but with fans and with people I know that, follow Carolina basketball religiously. And we're here to talk about, and pretty much just, put the question out there for everybody and for us to discuss as well is, will Hubert Davis actually play the bench that he has at his disposal and will have at his disposal going into the new season? And for me, it's a very interesting topic, AJ, because I look at it like this. We have a lot of assuming going on that Hubert's going to play the bench. And I think, I don't know what your opinion is on. I think I know what your opinion is, but I don't know for a fact. It does seem like all directions point to him doing that. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the proof that's in the pudding, we don't have a lot to suggest that he'll actually do that. And that's just based on what's happened in the past. Now, there's a lot of different factors for that. But now that he has his own roster and his own team, I think it's safe to expect that he'll at least do that in the future. But I do think it's a relevant topic to talk about because I don't think it's black and white as some people are making it. So when you look at history under Hubert Davis and you look at the roster he's built and you look at what's coming and the personnel he'll have at his disposal, do you think Hubert will rely and trust his bench more than he's done in the previous 2 years in North Carolina? Because again, AJ, we haven't seen it yet. So there's a lot of assuming going on to be like, well, he's going to just play that bench like crazy next season. It remains to be seen, in my opinion. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'll tell you this. If I had a $10 bill for every time someone has asked me that question, either in my neighborhood when I'm out getting my 10,000 steps a day, Facebook, I got a lot of people sending me stuff on Facebook, our DMs, I'd have a lot of $10 bills.
Yeah, man.
Because that's the topic. I think more than, can Elliot Cadeau handle being a point as a freshman? What does Jalen Withers give us? What does Harrison Ingram give us? What does Cormac Ryan give us? People are asking, I'm asking questions as people. They're asking more than anything. Yeah, but what's Hubert going to do with all of them? Is Hubert going to play those guys? Is he going to let them sit over there and rot on the bench? I think he's going to play the bench. And I do think there's a small bit of proof in the pudding in that in his first year, prior to Anthony Harris's academic issues that forced him to miss the rest of the season in early January, and prior to Dawson Garcia having that slight concussion at Boston College on January 2nd, having trouble coming back, then eventually he left and went home. Wasn't really a factor after that. If neither one of those two things would have happened, they would have had an 8-man rotation. So they would have had, actually, Dawson was starting up until that point, and then Brady went in the starting lineup afterwards. So they had an 8-man rotation. So 8 is plenty. Roy Williams played 8. Dean's played 8 before. A lot of national champions they go 3 deep in the bench. And there was some variety with the guys they went to in the bench because Puff was also one of those guys. So, yes, I do think that there's a little bit of proof in the pudding that Hubert has been inclined to play a bench before. I just think last year, and perspective in the offseason is a wonderful, wonderful thing, Jacob. I think looking back, there were no options. Puff was an option, but he was healthy last year. I thought Puff had some confidence issues as the season went on, didn't always appear super happy about things, and did not play to the level he did at NC State the year before, or even in the national championship game when he filled in a lot for Leaky. He played very well in the national championship game against Kansas. He wasn't that guy really ever last year.
No.
We didn't see it. And then what we saw from the other guys, I do think some of the scaled back game that we saw from Tyler Nickel was a result of not playing enough. He was more aggressive earlier in the year, less aggressive later in the year. It's sort of the looking over the shoulder aspect, the losing confidence because you're not getting on the court aspect. But he also didn't perform super well when he did play. Hubert just didn't have a lot of faith in the bench. And that's why I don't think he was grabbing at a lot of pant legs when guys left, saying, oh, I need you to stay. I don't think he was doing that. No. So what he did was he went out and brought in guys. He brought in, we've run the numbers countless number of times on our site. He brought in 8,300 career minutes. And outside of Caleb, there wasn't much that walked out the door. So he has brought in guys that need to play. You don't Jalen Withers or Harrison Ingram, one of the two of them are not going to start. You got to play the guy that doesn't start. You got to play him a lot. They brought in James Okonkwo to back up Armando. He's going to have to play those minutes. So he's a part of the rotation. They've got Jalen Washington and Seth Trimble back. Both have had very good off seasons. They have to be a factor in there somehow. Paxton Wojcik came in to be a role player off the bench, and we've seen that he could be very good against good teams. I submit to you his game at Michigan State last year as Exhibit A, and I'd submit to you his game at North Carolina 2 years ago as Exhibit B. So he has guys that have played. He has guys that are proven, that have plenty of on-court time and know what they're doing. So it's different. Last year, there was an unknown factor. He didn't know what he was going to get from Tyler Nickel from game to game. He didn't know what he was going to get even from Seth Trimble at some point. Seth kind of went through a phase in the middle of the season where he just never really fit in offensively. And I think part of it was he should have been on the ball when he wasn't, but that's a different topic for a different day. So yes, I do think he'll play the bench more because he has a bench now, and he has proven commodities on the bench. Plus, I think that there's a lot of multiplicity with this team. Last year, the starting five didn't mesh. So bringing in guys from the bench weren't going to mesh either. It's just was a hodgepodge that no one foresaw being a hodgepodge that became quite clunky and quite messy. And there was really no way of cleaning it up until you got to the end of the season. Some guys left, some guys came in, and now they have a chance to rectify in a totally different season with a new roster.
Yeah, agreed. I think the roster itself, like you've mentioned, kind of shapes up more for playing that bench because, again, we've talked about this a lot as it's Hubert's guys too. I think that was an excuse that is something we've talked about a lot that was kind of labeled for Hubert of like, well, he didn't recruit some of these guys. And I do agree. I always kind of agreed with that. He was on the staff that did recruit all these guys, so he did have a hand in a little bit, but it wasn't his selection of guys. He wasn't the head coach, at least for a majority of the players that he was relying on. But there also is a caveat to that, were situations and guys like you've mentioned that he did recruit and he didn't play for whatever reasons that it might be. And again,
they weren't ready. They weren't ready.
And again, that might be more of a factor. And
coaches want to win.
Experience now.
Yeah, coaches. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, you're fine.
Coaches want to win. Guys, I've been doing this for a long time. I've covered a ton of coaches. And coaches want to win, and they're going to play guys who can help them win. There have been teams of Roy Williams that were super, super deep. He played a lot of guys. There were some teams that weren't as deep. He didn't play as many guys. I covered Coach K for a long time. Same thing with him. He had some really deep teams, and sometimes he didn't have really deep teams. Connecticut played a lot of dudes last year, and they won a national title. Maybe this year they go 6 deep. You play the guys who can help you win games. And I just don't think that North Carolina didn't run a starting five that meshed together to help them win. They didn't make the NCAA tournament after going to the national title game the year before. So coaches aren't going to play guys they don't think can help them win. They're only going to play guys they think can help them win. And I think the great thing about this year's roster is there are a lot of dudes on that roster, a lot more than they had last year and more than they had 2 years ago, even when they had Anthony Harris, even when they had Dawson Garcia, that I think can help them win. And I believe Hubert thinks that they have more guys now that can help them win, really, that they've had some time, maybe since 2019 or maybe even 18. I think this will be a deeper team they've had since then.
I agree. I completely agree. We'll want to talk about one more thing real quick. Before we do that, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor. I mentioned them earlier. It's BetterHelp.com. Really exciting to be sponsored and partnering with them. And AJ, I want to talk to you about it because, sometimes in life we're faced with tough choices. Our next move, the path forward isn't always clear. It could be decisions around your career, relationships. There's so many different things that go in, to our everyday lives that make life harder than it needs to be. And it all starts up here, right? And therapy is a way to help stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life so you can move forward with confidence and excitement, which is so, so important in anything that you do. So trusting yourself to make decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, just like sports that we cover on a daily basis, the easier it gets. And I know for me sometimes, AJ, just talking things through with someone, I think anybody listening and everybody who listen can relate to this. sometimes just talking things through with someone can be just so incredibly helpful. Sometimes just talking, we do it. We know, AJ, we have discussions about THI and content ideas and new ways to do things. And when we talk about it, it gets it out there and it helps us and it makes us feel better and have a better path forward to how we want to attack it moving forward. That's a small microcosm and a different thing that we're talking about, but it all goes hand in hand. When you talk about things, it's easier to deal with them and learn from them and move on and adjust and everything you need to do. So we can all get in our own heads, and getting out of that by getting feedback, AJ, from a trained professional can bring you a ton of clarity in your life. So guys, start with BetterHelp.com. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give them a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. So it's very easy to fit around whatever kind of schedule, however busy you may be. You can fit in BetterHelp on a weekly basis. It's entirely online. And guys, all you have to do to get started, just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So let's say you start first 2 sessions, maybe you're, I don't know. I'm not getting a lot out of this. I don't really like who I'm talking to. You can switch it. It's absolutely free, no additional charge on that, which I think is absolutely awesome. So let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. And guys, check, we've got an awesome little promo going with them as well. If you check them out at betterhelp.com/THI, you can get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp. Again, that's betterhelp.com/THI to get 10% off your first month. AJ, we're going to make it easy for them. We're going to put the link in the description. All you got to do is click on it. It'll take you right over there. You probably see it popped up on your screen right now as well, but it's an exciting partnership. I don't think mental health gets talked about enough, AJ. And it's something I think we can, even if it's just a small amount with the listeners and people that watch us that we love on a daily basis, if we can just promote it a little bit from a 1 minute, 2 minute talking about it on a pod, hopefully that can help some people out, maybe start therapy with BetterHelp, and that can change their lives around. And, maybe one day they'll be looking back and be like, man, I'm glad I watched that daily drop that one day. And again, that's what we're here for. So check them out, betterhelp.com/THI, links in the description below. Big thank you to betterhelp.com for sponsoring today's drop. Real quickly, AJ, I'm going to play devil's advocate on this one, on your last point. And again, I'm not saying I disagree or agree with this, but the reason I want to bring this topic or this kind of devil's advocate perspective into play is because I've heard it from fans a lot. And I know you have as well on our message boards and Twitter and all that kind of stuff, and in person too. A lot of people, and I was of this opinion at a point as well, is, well, how do you build a bench if you never play a bench? And one thing that I always kind of, I think a lot of people threw at Hubert, and I saw this early on. I think you saw it too, was especially early on during his first couple seasons, some of those games against some of your patsies, some of your games when you're blowing out people by 20, 30. Hubert was a guy who rarely, even in those situations at times, went to a bench. And that's something we saw opposite with Roy. Roy didn't really care about, he didn't like to lose, but Roy would take losing a game in November to help build that bench because he knew in the long run that by getting these guys involved and seeing if they were ready and able to handle what he needed them to handle, they would be better off in April and March. And that's why there was always this thing with Roy of like, whenever, March came around late in the season, it always felt like his teams played their best basketball then. I think that had a big factor to do with it, was building that bench early on. We've kind of seen the opposite from Hubert. Again, we've seen him not put guys in situations where he could, especially early on in the season against lesser opponents. So I think that's a fair criticism because it's what we've seen. But do you buy into that? Does that play a factor? Because, again, I do think there's a difference between not having personnel. I do agree that they didn't have a ton that he could rely on and maybe weren't ready. But I also agree that bench and that personnel could have been maybe developed a little bit more early on and trusted a little bit more early on. So in the middle of ACC play, when they need to be thrown in at PNC Arena, they're a little bit more ready for it instead of maybe not having played for 3 or 4 games and being thrown into the fire. Do you buy into that a little bit? And again, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate.
Oh, no, I do. I think there's a lot to it. Roy played guys to get them ready. And he played guys so when he had to call on them in certain desperate situations, it wasn't all green and new to him. I don't think he took losses as a result, but he knew that it would make the game a little bit more challenging. He may have gone into a non-conference game thinking, well, our regular is going to have to be fantastic for 26 minutes because he knew he was going to play some of the guys and try to see what they can do. Mm-hmm. And also he liked player groupings. He was really covering him was great, tracking player groupings for a certain amount of time just to see how they play off of one another in a game, which is always going to be a little bit different than a practice. Now, Hubert did play the bench some early last year to get some of these guys opportunities, but He's not Roy. Roy was comfortable in his skin.
Yeah.
Roy was a Hall of Famer already. He had national titles. He was trained as a coach under Dean. Hubert played for Dean. He played for guys like Pat Riley in the NBA, but he didn't sit there and game plan with him. He didn't. And even if you work for a Nick Saban or you work for a Dean Smith, doesn't mean you're going to do things the way they did it. Doesn't mean you're going to communicate the way they did. Eddie Folker had good teams, but he was never Dean Smith. Roy's probably the closest thing to someone having the kind of career his legendary mentor had as anybody in the history of college basketball, maybe even other sports too. So they're all different. They're all going to ultimately do things that are within their own DNA. I think Hubert's DNA right now, at least through 2 seasons, is a guy that I got to win this segment. I got to win the game. I got to win this moment. And like so many coaches, he coached to win a game in November the way you coach to win a game in February. And that often wears a team down, wears a coach down. I think some of the messages that are sent early in a game, some of the things that you use to communicate to a team early in November, early December, don't have as much staying power throughout the course of a year. I remember when Mark Gottfried was at NC State, and I was covering a lot of NC State stuff when I was with Fox. I remember talking to somebody who knew him from him at Alabama, and they said, Gottfried coaches on November 15th like it's the first Monday night in April. And that crap wears out after a while. And his teams would always falter down the stretch. And I think we saw some of that with Hubert's team last year. They had a little bit of a spike, but they got so wounded early with their psyche. And then, he just didn't have the right buttons to push. He maybe didn't have the right words. It just never really came together. I like the coach who builds, but most of them don't, Jacob.
Yeah.
I covered a lot of dudes. I mean, they are terrified to lose that game in November because they don't think of it in terms of being able to make it up down the road. Roy always knew his teams were going to get better because talk about proof in the pudding, it absolutely was. Every one of his teams got better. Mm-hmm. He knew it. He knew that he was, the baddest dude on the block, so to speak, in that sense. Everything was going to go in the right direction. Hubert doesn't have that to draw from. So I understand why he'd be coaching for the moment. This year, with an older team and maybe a composition of the roster that more fits into what Hubert's vision of it should be, he should have more confidence in these kids. He should have more faith that they're going to play through certain moments and figure things out. He should have more faith that, hey, if one guy's really struggling, I could put this guy in. He's going to help us for a while. And if he gives us a spark for 4 minutes, let's give him a 6th and a 7th. Mm-hmm. He's going to have to learn how to do those things if he's going to be a highly successful coach, because North Carolina's always going to have a lot of talent. But you don't want to lose guys because they're squashed on the bench because they don't get opportunities, when they'll be able to help you a lot as juniors and seniors. And guys are going to be inclined to stick around a program like that if they're playing some, because the NIL opportunities are going to be great. It's a great place to go to school and be a BMOC when you're walking around campus as a North Carolina basketball player. For sure. And it's just an amazing personal experience. So we'll see how that stuff unfolds. Mm-hmm. I think he's going to play the bench this year because he has a bench. Mm-hmm. But I'm also looking at strictly from that logical perspective. But we don't know what Hubert's DNA is yet. That's why I've maintained all along, and I'm long-winded on this response, pardon me for that, but I'm climbing toward a few points here. In the end, I've said all along, it's going to take us a 3rd season to really know what kind of coach Hubert Davis is, to get a feel for how he fits into every aspect of the game as a head coach. This is one prong that we really don't know about yet. Now, if he rolls with an iron 5 and a little bit of a 6th or a 7th guy, then we're going to know that's who he is. Mm-hmm. And then he's going to have a hard time recruiting and keeping guys down the road. That's the bottom line. Mac Brown says all the time, if you don't want kids to get in the transfer portal, you got to get them on the field.
Exactly.
Well, same thing with basketball, especially nowadays.
Yeah. Oh, God, with the transfer portal. Absolutely. I'm going to sidebar for a second real quick, AJ, before we wrap this up. You mentioned Mark Gottfried. I actually I worked at a driving range off Capitol Boulevard in Raleigh. Some people would know what I'm talking about back in high school. And
let's keep this clean here. If we're talking about Gottfried.
He and Mark Gottfried walked in one day, super random, into a driving range. It wasn't this amazing driving range. It's not like it's super close to NC State, and I'll just never forget it because, he walked in with a lady, 15, 20 years a senior, probably pulled up in a red Corvette.
His senior or his junior?
or his junior, however the saying goes, excuse me.
Yeah, that's the Mark Gottfried I knew. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, let's say if he was 50, she was 30. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I always like to tell people that story because, he walked in very slick Rick-esque and very clean. And I don't know how many words he said to anybody, but it was every time I hear the Mark Gottfried, I think I've told you that story before. I'll just never forget that one because it was just very random, on a Wednesday afternoon at a driving range in the middle of Wake Forest. But just it fit the bill of what I thought Mark Gottfried was, based on what he was driving and who he walked in with. So I'll throw that one in there as a quick story.
This is crazy, but another writer and I were sharing Mark Gottfried stories the other day, waiting outside the football gate to go in and do interviews after practice because he covered them too. And it's just some coaches you can have those kind of conversations about more than other coaches. And Mark Gottfried was, the guy that told me from Alabama told me a lot of stuff, and man, it was spot on.
Yeah,
spot on about.
That's why I had to say it because he was exactly what I thought he was when he walked in. That was like exactly what if he ever walked into this driving range, that's exactly what he would pull up in, and that's exactly who he'd walk in with. So, do you
remember CJ Leslie?
Yeah, absolutely. How can
Well, see, he would always call him Calvin because I thought he probably figured that would make CJ grow up a little bit more. And he called him Calvin, and a couple of us in the media would always refer to him as CJ. On purpose because, come on, dude.
Just to piss him off.
It's like Calvin? No, CJ. Yeah. Calvin, CJ. Calvin, CJ. It's just like, come on, dude.
Come on,
man. He came in, I probably shouldn't even go here with this, but he came in with a little bit of an attitude like, well, I'm going to show this triangle basketball, Tobacco Road media something. A lot of us got a kick out of that. Yeah. Whatever. Hey, man, CJ Leslie had some great moments.
He did, man.
Guy in the wheelchair moment.
Yeah.
One of the great ones of all time.
Exactly, man. They had a little run under Gottfried for a little bit and then it fizzled out, obviously. But, I don't think anybody wants to hear us talk about NC State and Mark Gottfried any longer. So we'll go ahead.
But what we ought to do one of those things where it's all private, you pay for it. I could tell some Mark Gottfried stories.
Ooh, man, I think
tell a lot of stories.
Heck, you might get some
steak. You know a lot of the stories because I tell you, I just pray that you're not recording my stuff. But
that's my Mark Gottfried story is, I'll wrap it up with this, is not nearly as exciting and funny as some of yours. Mine really isn't even a story. It's just a random.
But the Hubert Davis story, that people are going to tell in, what is it, about 7 months from now? Mm-hmm. I guess that would be 7-8 months from now. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be one where, he did use the bench.
Yeah.
So I'm going on record. I'm going on record saying that I think he's going to use the bench.
I think you're absolutely right. I think you will too. And again, when it's your personnel, your players, the roster you built, and again, it's an experienced roster as well, which I think really helps as my backlight goes off, which is probably a sign that we should go ahead and wrap this one up. AJ, we'll go ahead and do that.
That's the first time we've deviated on one of these drops in a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I had no idea we had Mark Gottfried happening tonight.
Yeah, you brought up Mark Gottfried, and it was like, well, I got a little quick Mark Gottfried story I can tell you. So
you should Google pictures of Mark Gottfried at Northridge State in the beard.
Look it up, guys. Look it up. I'm sure people are Googling it right now. And again, if you find
I'm not going to say anymore, man. I'm going to get in trouble if I keep doing this.
Heck, we might be on Twitter later and have some people, mentioning us with a photo of Mark Gottfried there. So who knows what the heck's going to happen with that one. We'll see what happens. We love to hear from our listeners anyway. So whatever it takes, we'll Exactly, man. Again, big thank you to BetterHelp.com for sponsoring. Check them out, BetterHelp.com/THI. Get 10% off your first month. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Again, I'm going to continue to say it like I've always done with these drops. We want to hear from you guys. Do you think Hubert's going to use the bench? Get involved. Twitter, Facebook, at our website, and be a premium subscriber for just $8.33 a month. You can become a Carolina Insider too. Every single link, we like to make it easy for you, AJ. Every single link you need that I just mentioned is below. So go check it out in the description. Yep. Appreciate y'all watching as always. See you on the next one. Thanks.